We've worked very hard over the last 8 years. We've never really had time off. We felt there's always been a challenge for us. And secondly, I think we're very lucky we've had two very good songwriters in the band, Vince in the early days and Martin, which I think is very unusual for a band. And I think we've also been given chance to develop. We've been very fortunate with being on Mute Records, and Daniel sort of believed in us. And I think if we'd have been on a major label, I think I wouldn't be talking to you now.
If we had been a bit more sort of aware of things at the time, I think we would have done things in a slightly different way. There's just certain things we wouldn't have done. There's certain TV programmes we wouldn't have done. There's certain interviews we wouldn't have done. We just used to do every interview that came along. We just spoke to anyone and in a very honest way. We really had no idea how sort of far the thing was going to go. You know, we were still sort of working right up until the first time we appeared on Top of the Pops, really. We were still worried, you know, thinking to ourselves, well, you know, this isn't going to last. Bands never last, you know. We have a bit of fun. And of course then it gets to like the next record and the next record, and then suddenly Daniel from the record company, Daniel Miller, turned around and said, well, you know, you've really got to decide now, you know.
We was never really an ambitious band. In fact, the ambitious person in the band was Vince, who was unemployed at the time, and he really had a drive and ambition, and still has now, really, to do well. And we were very lazy, basically, and so for us it was thrown upon us. The first single went in the charts, and we left our jobs, and basically we had to carry on. We felt, you know, there was no option.
When all these labels were coming along and offering us sort of huge amounts of money, I mean, they were coming down to Basildon, you know, and looking for us in pubs and things like that, you know, and really it became quite funny, you know. We started to have some fun with it. We would go out for meals with these people and various record companies, and when we met Daniel, of course, the first thing Daniel said to us was that he didn't have any money, really, and but he really loved what we'd done, and would love to put out a record, and would do his best, do his utmost to compete with whoever else with, you know, a major label. And that was at that time, that was the most honest thing we had heard, you know, from anyone. If we had maybe signed to a major label, maybe we wouldn't be here now. Maybe we would have been sort of pushed so hard that we wouldn't have had time to develop. And that's something that Mute allowed us to do in our own way. We've always produced ourselves and managed ourselves. So we've had time to develop and learn by our mistakes. And, you know, that's a very important part of Depeche Mode.
I think he felt that he could do the same as he was doing, but on his own. So he wasn't, because he felt he'd done all the work to make the band successful. I think it was really, I mean, the excuse he gave at the time was that he didn't want to be public property, and he didn't want to be, he just wanted to do what he wanted to do, and without sort of people mobbing him in the streets and things like that, and he didn't like touring at all. But I mean, he's done that since. So I just think basically felt, rightly so, really, that he could because he was a good songwriter and a good musician, that he could do it on his own.
Well, there was a lot of things that were said at the time about Vince being sort of fed up with the whole sort of thing of having to do TV and having to sort of go on tour all the time, and far too many commitments really for Vince to, you know, he could feel that he could keep. Really, he didn't want that sort of, I don't know, responsibility, really. I think that was the main thing. He felt that he was just getting closed in. And Vince is quite individual in his ideas. He's very strong. He was very strong-minded at that time. He was the one, really, that was driving the band at that time. He wanted success desperately, I think. He was having to consult with, you know, 3 other people on everything. And maybe he felt that his ideas were being squashed because of that. Various things were said at the time, but I think that was the reason. He just felt a lot of pressure.
Looking back, we should have been really scared, you know, that it was going to be all over, but we just carried on, basically.
The next album we made, A Broken Frame, we done as a 3-piece, just Martin, Andy and myself. And I think in a way that was to kind of prove to ourselves that we could sort of make a record without Vince as well. And it was a learning process for Martin, because he suddenly had to write like 10 songs for this album. And I think he felt quite a lot of pressure.
it's been a real love-hate relationship. That's what's always, I can never understand really. Like, a lot of people really hate us, and I mean, I've always thought we're just basically a pop band, a good pop band. I've never could understand why people can hate us, and the press definitely. I think it's just the way we make music. Obviously, it's alien to what most people think. A lot of people prefer guitars and drums and traditional rock lineup, and because we're a basic electronic band, a lot of people don't like that for a start. A lot of people are put off by our early past, you know, like Just Can't Get Enough and all this thing, when basically we smiled. If someone took a picture of us, we smiled, and we was like, I mean, we overexposed ourselves a bit in the early days, so people got sick of us for that as well.
But we were very young, you know, we were in our teens, and we were never forgiven for doing some of the things that maybe we shouldn't have done, because as I said before, there's no manager, there's no one telling us what sort of TVs we should do and how we should look on a TV, or how we should look in this photo session, or, you know, it's never been that contrived. And if it was that contrived, we'd all stop, because that's not the way Depeche Mode do things. You know, it's a bit sad really, because you go to other places like America and the rest of Europe, and you know, it's you're reviewed and for the record you make. You know, it's not like they don't really sort of talk about the past at all. It's more optimistic in a way. They're always more optimistic about things, and in Britain people are too ready always to write you off and destroy people. The press they love to put people down, which is really sad. It's so negative, you know, in lots of ways. But that's just the way the British press is. Our public image is not particularly good somehow. I don't know. Again, I think people find it sort of a bit odd. You know, it's not going along with everyone else. You know, we don't try and sort of dress with the times or anything like that. It's just like however we feel we want to dress. You know, and that was one of the reasons why we all started sort of wearing black. Really, it was just something we developed into. It wasn't like a move into image or anything. It was just that suddenly we looked kind of united, you know, and there wasn't so much, you know, importance based on the way we looked. It was more put back onto the music, really. We've always been quite individual in how we wanted to look as well, you see. So if someone wants to do something slightly outrageous, generally we just have to go along with it, which I think has been a problem in the past, because it's caused too much fuss. You know, sometimes the way Martin, for instance, used to dress up caused too much fuss, and there was too much attention put on the way that Martin was looking. And I think all of us felt in a way that the attention was being sort of taken away from the music and the real strength of Depeche Mode, and too much on image, you know. But it wasn't like a conscious thing for Martin to do that, or for us to say, you know, that, you know, we should tame this down a bit or something. You know, it's just developed into that, and Martin is generally not. I think it was just a phase he was going through. I mean, I think it's been a very, very important part of the success of Depeche Mode. More important probably than we really know, and we really think, because, you know, we've created such a solid following, and by doing that every year from when we began going out and touring, we've been able to build up a real audience. It's not a fabricated audience that are just going to go away with the next record. It's an audience of people that have become part of Depeche Mode as well. You know, they've become so involved that they go to every gig and they buy every record. But there is an incredible warmth, and there's an incredible feeling between band and audience, and it's something that I work very hard at on stage to put across with the audience. And for me, it's you know, I want. Some bands like to just sort of be very cold and just play their songs and then go off. But I don't. I like to sort of get the whole audience involved as well, and then it becomes like a really special thing. If you can do that with 65,000 people, you know, it's almost bringing you to tears. You know, just the sort of feeling. You know, it's not only the feeling of power. It's, I don't know. It's not just the power. It's just very emotional. You know.
A lot of pop stars have to go around with bodyguards, and I mean, they do need them, you know, because they're faces. But I always think that a lot of that is their own fault, you know, because if you go for all this publicity, if you go for all this press, you know, that's what you got to expect. That as soon as you go anywhere, you're going to be recognised straight away, and then you could get trouble any time.
We've all changed very much, but then, you know, who's to say that we wouldn't have gone in that way anyway, changed in that sort of way. Your whole character might have changed in that way anyway. I mean, we've all, we're all sort of, 8, 9 years older, 9 years older now than from when we began first playing together or rehearsing together. It's difficult to say how you would have changed, as a person. Obviously, having sort of, more money to do things is great, And sometimes you think, well, in the music business, when you're making records, sometimes you feel that you're paid far too much for what you do. And I suppose in a way, sometimes you feel a bit guilty about that. But it's, you have to work very hard for it, and you have to make a lot of sacrifices for it. And that comes with any kind of fame. Sometimes you want to just not be in Depeche Mode, You want to just be David Gahan again, But then, if you suddenly lost it all, I think you'd be really lost as well, without it. I don't know. It's something I don't like to think about, really. I do think about it, but I don't like to go too deep into it and think, well, what would I do if, all this fell through, all this finished? Because that's, if you start worrying about that, I suppose, then you're losing any excitement you've got anyway, because you're too worried about what's going to happen in the future.
To become the status quo of the 90s, without a doubt, But I mean, like groups like the Kinks have been going for how long? 25 years? I mean, and I think the records they made in the 60s were a lot better than the records they make now. But I mean, I hope we can tell, when it comes to 1995 and we're still going, I just hope we can tell that we are, if we're not making good records.
We feel that we're improving all the time, and I certainly feel that Martin's songwriting goes from strength to strength, really. I don't think he's definitely not hit a low as yet. I think he wrote some of his best songs ever on the last album. I feel, definitely anyway. I mean, I suppose you're always going to say that your last album you feel was your best album, but I'm just going to have to go along with that as well.